Tony James is asleep in bed, suddenly got woken up by his mum knocking on his bedroom door and telling him to get ready for school. He get his uniform on and has breakfast, which just consists of cornflakes. Tony walks to school and meets his friend Christopher McDougal outside the gate. During lunchtime, Christopher brings Tony aside and presents something out his school bag. A blank Betamax tape. Tony asks where did he obtain it. Christopher said he found in a dilapidated shed from the allotments near his house and suggests they watch it after school. Tony inspects it and questions if it is one of those nasty films the government banned recently. Christopher wasn't sure and both went off to have some lunch. After school, Tony arrived to Christopher's house. Christopher opens the door, says his parents were out with friends down the pub and won't be back till after midnight, much to his delight. Tony and Christopher prep themselves with snacks and drinks. Christopher put the tape in the machine and the both eagerly waited for was to come up on the small screen. Their hopes were dashed when the screen just shown a static image. They waited for 10 minutes for something to happen but nothing, and Christopher in a disappointed mood thrown the tape in the bin. Tony stayed with Christopher till about 9 o'clock and headed back home. Tony comes in. His mother was in the kitchen washing some pots and their French au pair Yvette was watching television in the living room. Tony later on went to bed and fell asleep. The next morning there was a knock on the door and Yvette answers it. One of Tony's school friends, Gordy, came to see him but for a different reason. Gordy was tearful and told Tony that Christopher and his family had been killed in their home. Tony was shocked by this and took a few minutes to process this terrible news. The local newspaper reported on this and it said that a massacre had happened sometime after midnight. Tony approached Christopher's house. It was covered in crime scene tape and all the windows were shattered. Tony decided to sneak in from the back garden and inspect what had happened. Tony approached the back door when he was stopped in his tracks. Someone was behind him asking what he was doing. He quickly turned and it was the doctor. Tony panicked and raced off from Christopher's house. He went back home and hid in his bedroom. He looked outside onto the street with his eye peeping through the curtains. He saw the doctor walking down the street and stopped outside his house. The doctor turned in a circle clockwise, then anti-clockwise, and then he looked up at Tony's house. Tony was frightened by him. He wasn't sure if he was with the police or just a weirdo lurking on the street. Tony laid on his bed and tried not think about the doctor. The next day Tony and Yvette were in Tesco shopping. Whilst in the dairy aisle, Tony sees the doctor nearby with Louisa. Tony's heart stopped and went into a panic. Yvette told him to cut it out and to stop pulling her trench coat. Tony moved away from Yvette and hid round the corner. Yvette looked at the doctor and walked over to him. Tony watched Yvette talk to the doctor. He didn't hear the conversation, and when she returned back to him she said he's working for unit investigating the massacre. Tony wasn't sure about this and took it with a grain of salt. Later that night there was knock on the door. Tony's mother answered it and the doctor was on the doorstep. The doctor asked if he could meet Tony and ask him a few questions. Tony dashed to his room and hid under the bed sheets. Tony's mother lets the doctor in and introduces herself as Audrey. Audrey gives the doctor a cup of coffee and discuss about Tony's friend. Tony was still hiding under the bed sheets and the door opened. The doctor came in. He slowly paced up and down the room. He asks Tony some questions regarding Christopher and this blank tape the two boys saw. Tony, still covered, told the doctor what happened. The doctor listened in and stared out the window looking at the street showing in the moonlight. Tony said to the doctor what will he do, and the doctor's fluffs his sentence. The doctor wasn't sure. He didn't have a plan or evidence to find the answer. But the tape was the key. However, Christopher had thrown the tape away and is probably in a landfill somewhere. The doctor departs the house and after meeting the doctor Tony felt a slight sigh of relief. The next morning Tony woke up only to find the tape on his bedside table. He was shocked. Did the doctor put it there or did it randomly appear like magic? He wasn't sure. Later Tony was in the kitchen and noticed a piece of paper on the fridge with some numbers and the initials Doctor. He reached for the phone and punched in the numbers. A woman answered the phone and asked who was calling. Tony said his name and the woman replied saying that he needs the doctor. Tony hesitated and said yes. The woman at the end of the line was Louisa and the doctor was in background listening whilst fixing a model sailboat. The doctor took the phone and Tony said he's got the tape but doesn't know how he ended up with it. The doctor said he'll come around tonight to check this tape out and Tony okayed it. That night the doctor entered Tony's house from the back door and Tony presented him with the tape. The doctor went into the living room and inserted the tape in the machine. Tony hid behind the settee in case anything happened. The screen presented the same static image and the doctor leaned forward towards the screen. A knock on the door distracted him and quickly headed to the front. At the door were a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses asking for a donation. The doctor ferociously tells them to bugger off and slams the door in their faces. He returns to the living room to see the screen still presenting the same static image and decides to press the fast forward button to see if it could produce a result. Another knock on the door distracted his investigation and headed again to the door. Louisa was at the door and asked to be let in. She also brought back a man she met in one of the local pubs and he was called Darren. The doctor was a bit baffled about this and Tony emerged from the settee saying that his mum and Yvette were asleep upstairs. A clock on the wall chimed at midnight and then the television started to spark. The doctor stepped back and tried to figure out what was happening. The static image was fuzzing relentlessly, making warped screeching sounds and blue lightning was surrounding the wooden casing. Louisa noticed a hand emerging from the television and the doctor instructs her along with Darren to go out the living room. Tony remained behind the settee and peeped over the top to see what horrors were coming out of his television. Something had emerged from the television and was started to form into a human-like figure. The doctor was trying to communicate with it, asking why it's in this dimension and what its motives were. The figure spoke to the doctor. It mentions that it's freed and that the doctor had somehow imprisoned it during the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. The doctor was confused and tried to think if he fought such an invasion during that time. The figure changed into a hologram form with the image represented a female BBC continuity announcer and yet the doctor didn't recognize her. She calls herself the Wire and during her imprisonment had harnessed powers to conjure hellish monstrosities and planned to continue her motive by stealing victims to restore her body. The doctor in this confused manner points the sonic screwdriver at the Wire and scans her making the holographic start to judder. The Wire screams in pain and unleashes a sonic wave making the doctor fly across the living room and smacked into the wall. Tony sees the doctor on the carpet and emerges from the settee to confront the Wire. The Wire stares and smiles at Tony and remembers him. Tony denies this and never seen it but the Wire then says Christopher McDougall. Tony is shaken by this and the Wire explains that he wants Tony because it put an identity print on him when he watched the tape, hence the sudden reappearance of the tape in his bedroom. The Wire had killed Christopher for the exact reason. It made the two boys become bait for the Wire to start harvesting again and that Christopher was a fighter for its powers but lost in the end. Tony demanded if Christopher was still alive and the Wire just put its hands on its face saying he's somewhere in there. The doctor got up from the carpet and persuaded Tony to run because if he doesn't he'll end up like his friend. Tony escaped and the Wire screamed turning its bluish holo color into red. An intestine-like tentacle emerged from the television and grappled onto the doctor. Tony headed upstairs where Louisa was waiting. The Wire emerged from the wall like a ghost and floated up the stairs. Louisa moved quickly and ended in Yvette's room. Yvette got up and screamed because people had abruptly entered her room. Louisa tried to shut her up and the Wire enters in. Yvette's bed was starting to shake and a clown doll came out laughing with crazy red eyes. Its white-gloved hands had evolved into yellow bone claws and started scratching them like a rabid cat. Tony was hiding the bath with the shower curtain shut. The toilet lid was popping up and down. Tony was still in the bath. Watching the lid went up revealing a contorted fetus and started screaming at him. The doctor still entangled with the tentacle tried to free himself but no luck. Darren burst in and violently chopped the tentacle up with a wood axe. The doctor thanked him and headed upstairs. The doctor met up with the girls battling against the vicious clown doll and in a quick reaction sprayed Shaw deodorant on it. The doctor then reached for a box of matches and thrown one at the clown doll setting on fire. The clown doll screamed and ran round the room like a toddler burning to death. It fell to the floor, breathing heavily. The doctor stamped on it causing its head to fly off and multicolored confetti flopped out of its neck stump. Before the doctor could reintroduce himself to Yvette he can hear Tony in the bathroom and force the door to came off its hinges accidentally. The doctor saw Tony being threatened by the contorted fetus and noticed its umbilical cord was still connected to it from the toilet. The doctor flushed the toilet causing the fetus to get forcefully pulled back into the toilet but it didn't go down and the doctor quickly found a plunger. The doctor shoved the fetus down the toilet with the plunger. The fetus squealed and retorted but finally got pulled into the system never to return. The doctor helped Tony out and asked him to reunite with Louisa and Yvette. Tony was agitated that the wire would go for his mother next, and the doctor reluctantly said he'll rescue her. While Tony stayed put with the girls, the doctor walked to Audrey's bedroom. There were bloodied fingerprints on the door, and the doctor was concerned if Audrey was alive or not. The doctor carefully entered the bedroom. It was dark and quiet, too quiet for the doctor's liking. The doctor then saw the wire looming over Audrey. She was sleeping and wasn't aware that a floating red hologram was hovering over her. The doctor intervened quickly and jumped at it. The wire rapidly disappeared and the doctor belly flopped onto Audrey, waking her up, and started to scream. The doctor covered her mouth with his hand, apologized and told her to keep quiet. The wire was nowhere to be seen. Audrey felt something drip onto her cheek and the bedroom light suddenly came on. On the ceiling was Darren. He was lynched up by wires with shards of metal and his blood was dripping all over the bedroom. Audrey let off a loud scream even if the doctor had covered it with his hand. Suddenly the wire emerged at the side of the bed and the doctor pleaded not to kill her. The wire smirked and pushed the doctor out of the bedroom window. The doctor landed on a metal garden table and thankfully hadn't broke any bones but was in agony due to the fall. Something was tunneling to him in the back garden like moles, and a decayed dog's head emerged from the ground. The doctor limped his way to the back door and more animal heads popped up. They crawled out the ground revealing their bone muscular bodies with spindling spider-like legs in the vein of roots. They pounced at the doctor like monkeys and the doctor managed to get into the house. The doctor sat on the kitchen floor in relief, but one of the creatures stuck its head through the cat flap trying to get in and the doctor batted it with a brush. He moved the washing machine to the door blocking their entrance to get in, and some of them were pouncing at the windows like oblivious pigeons leaving splats of blood on the glass. The doctor, still limping, battered and bruised, went back upstairs to face the wire. The girls and Tony noticed him climbing the stairs. They were aghast at how battered the doctor was and watched him enter Audrey's bedroom for a second time. Tony was concerned for his mother. Yvette reassured him that the doctor will save her. Yvette believes that the doctor will and that he can. The doctor stumbled in and saw the wire has caught Audrey in one of the tentacles. The wire taunts the doctor and threatens to rip Audrey in half. The doctor revolts this and demands the wire to stop this bloodshed. The wire just cackles evilly and psychically tightens the tentacle onto Audrey. Tony tries to think of a way to help the doctor and remembers the tape player. Louisa listens into his idea and suggests to Yvette. They agreed dubiously if something from this will work, but they have to try and prevent anything else to come through. They made it downstairs to the living room and see the television screen in the form of a swirling portal. Faint screams and devilish cackles were heard from it. Tony feared something else was trying to get through and kneeled down to the tape machine pressing various buttons to see what happens. The wire started to fluctuate, flashing randomly from blue to green to red again and screaming in different pitches. The tentacle holding Audrey exploded into faint sparks, freeing her from death, and the doctor wondered what on earth is happening. The wire's hologram then started to get pulled like strings and Louisa came in saying Tony is messing with the tape machine. The doctor headed out and accidentally tumbled down the stairs. The doctor reached the living and saw Tony pressing randomly on the tape machine. The doctor then noticed the wire being pulled through the walls and into the television. Tony had managed to bring it back into the television, but the wire had one last trick and forced Tony into the screen. Louisa and Yvette grabbed Tony's legs and tried to pull him free. The wire then changed its face to Christopher's, trying to make Tony to join it. Tony instantly refuses and that his friend is dead. Tony was pulled to safety and the doctor got the sonic screwdriver out. The doctor burnt out the electrics of the tape machine and the wire gets sent back into the depths of the portal. The television was restored to normal and the Betamax tape got ejected from the machine. It was warped and burned. It was unplayable and the doctor ended up smashing the casing into pieces. The tape reels were burnt by the doctor using lighter fluid and matches on a small wood pile. The doctor and Louisa bid farewell to Tony and leave his house in a state. Arriving at the TARDIS, Louisa questions the doctor about the wire and how it knew him. The doctor just shrugged at this and said probably to do with passing his own time stream. They enter the TARDIS and it dematerializes. In the house, Tony looks at a cracked mirror and looks at his reflection. Suddenly his reflection leaps forward and grabs his throat. He screams.